Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Cookie Jar Golf Podcast. I am Tom Mills. Today I'm joined by Sam Williams and we are joined by Jim Hartsell. Jim Hartsell has recently released his second book, When Revelation Comes, which is a story about him travelling around Scotland after a personal tragedy, and he travels around Scotland and goes to a load of places that I'd never heard of and fascinating stories around the game and around the country. Jim also put together an Eclectic 18 to go with the book for courses he played in the book, and he's put it together for us, and you can see that in the pod description. And for those of you guys that are interested in purchasing the book, you can do. You can get it on back9press.com, and with the code 20OFF, that's 20OFF, which gives you a bit of discount on the book for the listeners of Cookie Jar Golf. Jim's actually heading over to the UK. He's heading over to Scotland. He's heading over to Dunaverty, where he's going to do a book signing in April. You can get any information on that on Twitter. You can just search Jim Hartsell, or his Twitter handle is Jim H. Hartsell. Sam and I had a brilliant time talking to Jim. He's got some great stories in the game, and I think this is a brilliant podcast for you guys to listen to, and I hope you enjoy.
Watch this.
How you doing, Jim? You well?
I'm well. How about yourselves?
Yeah, good. I like your Cruden Bay hat.
Yeah, it's a little bit cold here today, but I did put that on just especially for you guys. So.
Well, you know what's funny, Jim, is we'll roll into the pod shortly, but we'll chat for a bit. When I joined the Zoom, Tom was wearing a woolly hat in his office, and I said, "Come on, Tom, you can't do a podcast wearing a woolly hat indoors. Jim will be appalled at you." And then you brought a woolly hat onto the podcast, so you've given him full permission now to.
Well, I've stolen it from No Laying Up. They almost always have one on when they're doing it, and they're usually in Florida. So, yeah, no worries.
Now, I think you're going to be a very familiar name with most of the people that listen to this podcast. You write for the Links Diary, No Laying Up, Golfer's Journal, a bit of a star on Twitter, and obviously, around the game quite heavily. But for those that might not have heard of you, how would you best introduce yourself and your, I guess, role in golf?
Well, I've played golf my entire life, as long as I can remember. My dad played, my grandfather played, and that's just what we did. When we went on holiday, we took our golf clubs and we'd go out and play early in the morning before everybody else woke up, and be back at the room before things got going good. And I just became obsessed by the game as a young kid with my dad, and I just will always have been involved in it. And I am an architect in my 9-to-5 job, but I started getting into golf writing. It's something I always wanted to do, probably about 7 or 8 years ago now. And I started off kind of slow. It's difficult to get into, to say the least. But I was lucky. I met Tron Carter and DJ and Big Randy from No Laying Up. Actually met them and played golf with them. We got to be friends, and they were really interested in these trips I was taking and asked me a lot of questions. And, eventually they asked me to write some for their website, which I wrote a series for several years ago called Hidden Scotland, which I can't remember exactly how many, maybe it was 9 or 10 installments that I did. And I got a good reaction to that. And about the same time, the Links Diary was starting up. And I was lucky to meet, I've met Jamie and Kenny, that two of the guys that run that. And I just asked them if they were looking for writers for it. And they're like, yeah, what have you got? And so I sent them a story. I think the first story I actually sent them was one about Dunaverty. And, just within an hour, I got a message back like, this is great. We want to put it in our next edition. So I've written for everyone. I think they've had 5, and I've got my next 3 stories lined up for them. I'm doing one on Brora for the next issue, and then probably Iona, and then just but that's been great. And then I got, I was lucky to get in Golfer's Journal, which is a beautiful magazine. I don't know if you guys have.
Stunning, yeah. Big subscriber to it, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's just beautiful. One of the best, honestly, and maybe the best. And I sent them an idea for a story about 3 or 4 years ago, and they were interested. And anyway, I wound up getting a story in there, and then I've had another one, and then I've got another one coming out with them, hopefully, and then maybe not the next issue, but the issue after. So that kind of took off, and around that time, I had this idea of writing this book about Sweetens Cove, which is a golf course in Tennessee, about an hour and 15 minutes from where I live. And we don't have to go into Sweetens Cove, but that was my first book, and it did pretty well. And then I had this idea. I'd always wanted to write a book about Scotland. I'd had that on my list, and I was going to do it. And then I wound up doing it for a little bit different reason than I planned on. But it did sort of. It was a much harder. It took me 2 years to write the Sweetens Cove book. This one
what's that adjustment like? Just on that, Jim, what's that adjustment like, going from sort of essays and 2,000 word pieces, 3,000 word pieces up to a full form book? Like, was that like a big jump for you?
It is a big jump. These other stories are 5,000 words or 3,000 words, and you can pretty much do that in a weekend or a week. It just depends on how much research you have to do. The Sweetens book had so much research and so many interviews. It was just a completely different thing. I mean, it took so much of my time, and I had to getting people on the phone that are all over the world, and talking to them about something. It's hard to do, and so that and just the amount of. Unfortunately, I've got the ability to do this for whatever reason, but to keep the thread of a story going that's 60 or 70,000 words is challenging. And, you have to, in the back of your mind, you almost have to have that like on the desktop of your brain the whole time you're writing is, okay, this has to have continuity, and it has to be an ongoing story. And so that's a challenge, and, one that I enjoy, honestly, but it's different than just the stories that are in, say, the journals and so forth.
Can we just ask a little bit about Sweetens? Because I was going to probably say for the end, but given you've mentioned it, as somebody who's never played golf at Sweetens Cove and been out in that part of the world, it almost has like it's become almost the poster child for maybe whether it's sort of that brand of golf, if you know what I mean. It's almost transcended maybe what it is. It seems like I don't know. How would you try and explain Sweetens Cove to someone who's never been there?
Well, the biggest compliment I can give it is it reminds me of playing golf in the country in Scotland at Dunaverty or Carradale or Try or wherever. It's just pure golf. There's not a big production about, whatever, like if you go play at some of these resorts and places in the U.S., it's just pure golf, and it's meant to be played on the ground. You can run the ball up into almost every green. There's just a feeling about it that reminds me of, and I think my introduction to that book is really comparing it to driving up to, Cruden Bay for the first time, or Machrihanish for the first time. You sort of come around this corner, you come over a hill, and you're like, oh my gosh, look at this place, and that's the way Sweetens is. You sort of drive down this winding country road, and you're like, where in the world am I going? And then you pull into this valley, and you're sort of looking down on this golf course, and the first time you do it, I mean, it's just it's reminiscent of one of those. I'm sure you guys have done it, where you come up to one of these places and you're just like, oh my gosh, it's just it's just all laid out in front of you. And you don't get that a lot in the U.S. for whatever reason, and I think it was I know Rob, the architect, Rob Collins, and I write about it in the book, was influenced heavily by courses he'd visited in Scotland, and he's a big student of Alistair McKenzie, and so that was kind of the principles of the course, and it's just nothing else like it around here, really, to be honest. I mean, it's a place that kind of got me back into playing a lot here. I mean, I've played so much golf in the UK over the last 30 years. It almost becomes, that's what I look forward to the most, and I'm kind of depressed when I have to go out to just a regular golf course. But Sweden's kind of brought me back to, wanting to go out, and we play match play. We don't hardly ever keep score. Honestly, I don't know that the only time we keep score if there's a competition, which is very much like the way you guys play. So that's what I love about it. It's pure golf, and it sort of highlights the important things about golf, which is playing fast, fun, having fun, hitting a lot of good shots, playing different shots. Yeah. I mean, you're starting to see a little bit more of that type of design. Although Sweden's just kind of came out of nowhere, and you got to give Rob credit for just creating this place. And it's a fascinating story. And I didn't, if people haven't read that book, I urge you to get it too, because it's just an incredible story of a guy not giving up on his dream of being a golf course architect. And this place shouldn't be there, but it is. And yeah.
I want to talk about obviously we're going to talk about the book because that's the main reason you're on. But before we jump into the book, I want to sort of investigate you a little bit, Jim, if we can, in terms of...
Sure.
I would say that it appears that you've been in love with Scotland for quite some time. And although you're not clearly a native Scotsman, that you're kind of... you've become a native Scotsman. Does that sound about right?
I hope I'm an honorary Scotsman at this point, at the very least. The
accent won't pass it, Jim. But
I think it is funny, but most of the people in Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia and Tennessee are from their ancestors are from Ireland and Scotland and England, and more Scotland and Ireland, and so. I don't know if that, I never was a big, ancestry person, but I did look it up. I think I've got this in the book, and I have a direct ancestor that is from just right outside of Lectilpid, where my friend Robbie is from. And, it goes back so far, who knows, but it is kind of, I don't know if there's anything in the DNA, but I just fell in love with it really from honestly watching the Open Championship. That's what started it. And I became obsessed at a fairly young age. I was a fairly precocious reader and, investigator of things when I was pretty young. I think I talk about it a good bit in the book, but that 77 Open at Turnberry was the one that just really flipped it for me. I was like, okay, this is golf. This is the way it's supposed to be. And I have got to understand this, and I've got to experience it. And I've been lucky. My dad was a golf nut, still plays once a week. And he's 79, and he loved it the same way. And so I was lucky, I could never have taken those trips when I was in my 20s without him. I mean, who can do stuff like that, without some help. So yeah, it just became an obsession, and it's been the thing I've kind of been my hobby. I've collected books and journal articles and I've got old Golf Monthly, before the internet, I'd cut stuff out of the back of Golf Monthly. They used to they'd have like course of the month or something, and you'd find some obscure for Americans, some obscure place like Panmure, or which is not obscure to me now, but back then I was like, okay, this just looks incredible. So I'd keep a kind of a folder of all this stuff, and sort of been checking it off over the last 30 years. So, yeah.
It's an interesting point you mentioned there, Jim, obviously cutting out of magazines. Just a side point, I mean, golf travel's so different now, isn't it? You know, whether it's the ability for us to do this podcast, and you know, obviously you've done an unbelievable Eclectic 18 to coincide with this podcast as well. But the courses you're mentioning, these are places that you had to literally discover by accident. You know, I'm guessing in your 20s, like you were never going to read about, you know, these places in the back of magazines, and now they're a little bit more accessible. And I don't know how much that's a good thing or not, and how, you know, we always sort of dip in and out of this conversation sometimes, but I guess golf travel is so different. You must have seen the country change so much every time you kind of go back.
It is completely different, Sam. I mean, it's a very good question. Just in the time I've been coming, and I really, it's at a few points in the book, I kind of reflect on that because, you know, for one thing, you know, you had to actually write letters to places, like actual written letters, and mail them. Like I remember trying to play Muirfield in 94, and I wrote a letter, and it took, in 3 weeks, I got a response, and I had to write them another letter, and they'd respond again. I mean, it was a whole process, and you know, and you know, the same thing for, you know, even Dornoch or Carnoustie or any of those places. It was fun. I mean, I enjoyed it, and I've still kept all that stuff. I love going back and looking at it. But now, you know, you can set up one of these trips so easily. Everybody has an online booking thing, and you know, but you're right. I found a lot of these places through people that I've met. I mean, one of the stories that starts out the book, you know, Dunaverty, which I go on about, and I'm a member there and love it. You know, I never heard of it, and I had heard of Machrihanish, and my dad and I made a special trip down to stay there. But you know, I was the only American that I knew that had ever heard of that place at the time. And so one day I'm standing, I'd already played Machrihanish. You could get a day ticket for £18. I've still got it. Imagine that. A day ticket at Machrihanish for £18, and you know, you guys know because you're from the UK. I mean,
the same everywhere. It was so cheap, wasn't it?
It was so ridiculous. Cheap. It was ridiculous, and you know, it never gets dark in Scotland in the summer. So you just play golf until you fall apart. But you know, so this one day I'd already played 18, and I thought, well, my house that I was staying was right across the road, and I thought I'm going to walk over here and get something. And the gentleman that owned the house, the bed and breakfast, he asked me what I was going to do that afternoon. I would never forget this conversation. And he knew we'd been playing Machrihanish like 36 a day, and I mean, he was kind of laughing at us. But he said, well, "What are you going to do this afternoon, Jim?" I said, "Well, you know, it was a beautiful day." I said, "Well, I guess I'm just going to go back out to Machrihanish," and I kind of gestured toward the course, and he said, "No." He said, "Why don't you go down to Dunaverty?" He said, "I think you and your dad would really enjoy this place." And he wrote out some directions for me. And again, this goes back to your point. I mean, there was no GPS. I mean, let me digress for 1 second, Sam. It is so much easier to get around now with GPS. I mean, so much easier. I mean, it's not even in the same realm of discussion,
particularly when you're in the Highlands and the Isles.
I mean, seriously,
of the world.
You're in the Highlands. I mean, I remember trying to get to Machrihanish that first trip. We flew into Glasgow, and we had an Ordnance Survey map, which I still have the map. I love those maps. But you know, my dad's sitting in the passenger seat trying to tell me where to turn. You know, I'm driving, first time I've ever driven on that side of the car. And, you know, we stopped. I don't know how many times we stopped and asked people, and I know they were laughing at us when we left, but you know, you know, now it's just, you know, it's, you know, you put it in the car, you put it in your phone, and you know, you off you go. And so that is a huge difference. And, you know, but finding those places has been mainly, and to get back to what I was saying, so this Mr. Baxter, the gentleman at Machrihanish, I took his word for it. So I'd never heard of this place. So we drove down there and we fell in love with it. We played 36 holes. They had an honesty box on the first tee. and so that's kind of, and I've been going back there ever since. And, so that's kind of how I've found a lot of these places is through friends and people that I've met. And as you say, now they're a little bit more known than they were then, but you can still drive around Scotland and see a course out your window and say, man, I need to stop and play this place. And it might just be 9 holes. And, but you see that all over the place. I mean, there's so many golf courses. And, anyway, I've played all the big ones a lot, but I just kind of gravitated toward these more lesser known places. For whatever reason, I love them.
There's a charm, isn't there? Particularly, they're almost more sort of contrasting to any other golf experience now, more so than ever. I can maybe think 40 years ago, the adventure with Dornoch, but maybe Dornoch now feels like, everything does become a little bit more homogenized, doesn't it? As we travel more and we see more. So, the Isle of Colonsay, which you've got on your scorecard, which I will add, I thought was a typo when you sent it through to me as a 370-yard par 5. Then I looked it up. I was like, no, this is legit. Like Jim's talking actual sense.
Jim
this is a par 5 hole. I'd never even heard of it. It's unbelievable.
I had, and just real quickly, you talk about going up to Dornoch. I mean, back then, it took forever to get to Dornoch, but now the A9 is fixed and, you can fly right up there. I mean, there's so much, it's so much easier to get around than it used to be. But, Colonsay, and I love doing this Eclectic 18 with courses from the When Revelation Comes. It was so much fun. I played, I think in the book, I played 27 courses, maybe 28.
In a month?
In a month. Now, granted, a lot of these were 9-hole courses. And, I usually just played once a day, but if I really played a 9-holer, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so good. I'd go back out and play it again after lunch or something. But yeah, it was Colonsay. It's about a 2.5-hour ferry ride from Oban. It's just a stunning island in the Atlantic that's just, there's 125 people that live there, and it's just another world, really. I mean, the island has I joke about this, but there's one little town where the ferry landing is, and there's a gin distillery, a bookstore, a little store, grocery store, and that's about, and a church, and that's about it. And I'm like, I've come to the perfect place. I mean,
it's got all bases covered.
It's got everything.
Gin and religion.
Yeah, gin and the church and the bookstore, and then it does have a little hotel that's just stunning, a perfect little country hotel called the Colonsay Hotel, of course. But the golf course is, I know this type of golf is not for everybody, but, if you like an adventure and you like playing golf like it would have been in 1780 or 1810, then this is for you. I mean, you sort of, I think it's about 1.5 miles, 2 miles from the hotel, sort of through this winding single track road, and you get to it, and you're up on a hill, and you're looking down in the Machrie, which is a, not to get too into the geological stuff, but it's a turf area that only exists in Scotland and Ireland, and it's this really resilient turf that's kind of by the water, and the ball just sits up on it like it's on a tee, and so we drove up to this place, and it's just out there again. It's just all out there before you, and it's not. I talked to the guy at the hotel. I mean, they cut the grass maybe once a month. I mean, it's sheep that cut the grass. There were sheep on every green almost, and they'd scattered out of the way when you'd hit. And I don't know, and it's got some really good holes. I mean, it's a completely natural golf course. They've somebody, and it supposedly dates back to the 1770s when the laird of the island had a course made out there, and you could just imagine that they just placed the greens in 18. They found the best spot for 18 greens, and they just put the greens there, and then you just play. And I mean, I love it. And the 18th, you joke about it being 370 yards, and I personally feel like par is kind of irrelevant in the UK, because it could be, if it's into the wind, that could play 870 yards. I mean, but it's an interesting hole because the tee shot's blind, and you play back across there's one sort of driveway that gets people down to the beach. Not that there's hardly any people out there, but you sort of play over that road, and then you're down into this kind of valley, and then you play back up to the top that you drove in on, and this green is sort of sitting in this natural bowl surrounded by these rocks. It's just incredible. And the day we played it, it was actually playing downwind a little bit, so you could get there. Although the layup shot is very difficult. I mean, you pretty much, if you miss the green, you're in serious trouble. But it's just, I know my course is under 6,000 yards, but I don't think that really is relevant, you guys, because I think, the mixture of holes still offers a challenge, and as it's a lot of it's dependent on the wind and the conditions too. So, but that's a good one.
Places they're so remote, aren't they? I mean, there's some places you've got on here that I've played quite a bit of golf in Scotland. Same for Tom. Obviously, not as much as you, Jim, but there's so many places on here that I've just not been to because they're way out. They're way out. I feel like we should talk about the book a little bit.
Just before we do. Jim, I feel like just before we dive into this proper, I want to ask like a philosophical question.
Okay.
Everything in America is big. It's big, and courses are big, and finances are big, and courses are manicured, and holes are long. And what do you think it is for you as an American growing up in that culture where you come and you seemingly have fallen in love with a set of courses? There are back to basics, really. They're manicured by sheep in most of 50% of your pick here would have fairly basic ways of manicuring it. What is it about the basic level of the sport that you love?
Well, you're walking in a beautiful place, and and normally you're walking, you don't meet, I always say this a lot, but you meet the best people through golf. And, the people that I've met and played with, like most of these courses, I played with my friend Robbie Wilson, who's in the book and throughout the book, and, and some other people that I've met. So it's just really the people that you're with and the setting and good, and there's good holes too. But it's your point about the U.S. is so big, it's really hard to comprehend, and people don't think about it a lot. But when you talk to people in Scotland, and I noticed this early on my first trip, somebody asked me where I was going, and I think I said I was driving to Dornoch or something, and they looked at me like I was flying to the moon. I mean, they're like, "You're going to drive all the way up there?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah." And the guy said, "Well, I've heard of people doing that, but I've never done it myself." And so the scale of everything is condensed, but it's, I don't know. I've always just liked it. It's smaller. The people are more in tune with their day-to-day life, in my opinion, and they're more interested in some respects, the more mundane aspects of life take on a larger role, which I find refreshing. But I went and played a golf course last summer called Landman, which is the second course.
Yeah, the new one.
Yeah, that Rob Collins has done, which is brilliant. I think it's voted the best new public course of this year or last year. And it was a 16-hour drive up there, and
wow,
it's just the scale of everything here is just so, and the courses are over. Now, Landman and there is a move to have courses that are a little bit more um, not as that are more in tune with what you're hitting on about the UK and Scotland. But generally, I don't know. I like that, just back to basics. And I'm happy playing Iona, which is I got on the list too. The fourth hole is another. It's just like Colonsay. I mean, it's manicured by sheep, and the greens, you can tell they've been put in, somebody's laid out a course where they thought the best 18 greens would go. And I don't know. I enjoy that part of it. I used to be a low handicap player when I was young, and I still play okay, but I don't really care. I'm more happy with the people I'm with and the course, and a good hole, and hitting a good shot, hitting a few good shots, and then talking about a few good shots after. And that's what I like, and that's what you get when you play these places, without fail. Now some of them, like Iona and Colonsay, I mean, there is no clubhouse to go into, but you go back to the hotel and people still want to talk about it. People want to talk about what you think about the course. What was your favorite hole? How'd you get on number 8 or number 7? And I just love that aspect of analyzing that part of the game, and not necessarily, how many would you shoot, and I don't know. And it just seems more prevalent there. And for whatever reason, I fell in love with it at a young age.
I find the community in Scotland, the whole community thing is just, the people are wonderful. And they're also friendly and welcoming. And, you say about Cruden Bay a couple of times so far. You go to Cruden Bay, it's in the top 100 courses in the world, and people still think you're an absolute hero for going visiting their golf course. It's so strange. It's like, listen, you want to say thank you to them.
When we, in 2019, and I reference this trip a little bit in the book, I went over with my middle son, Jake, who's a big golfer, and we went to Cruden Bay, and we happened to be there on his birthday. And I was walking into the pro shop, and Jake was out hitting some putts or something. And I told the pro just offhand, he said, "Well, have you been here before?" And I said, "Well, yeah, 10 times. I said, "It's been a few years, but I've played it a lot." And I said, "But this is my son's first time, and today's his birthday." And he didn't say anything. And he was very friendly, like they are there. And we went out and played. We had gotten a day ticket, so we went and played 18. We come in for lunch, and they've got a sign on the wall that says, "Happy birthday, Jake Hartsell." And after we'd ordered lunch, they come out singing his happy birthday to him with a cake and a lit candle. And, I'm like,
it's crazy, isn't it?
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
How
and
good is that? You never see that in American country club as a visitor, would you? No,
there is no way. And, Jake, to this day, it's been 4 years now coming up. And he talks about that. He's like, he's still like, "Hey, I can't believe they did that, Dad." And, it just, that kind of attention to just generally happy that people, as you say, one of the best golf courses in the world. I mean, they don't have to treat visitors like that if they don't want to, but they do. And, I don't know, that means a lot. That goes a long way with me. I mean, when I go in a place like Shiskine and Doogie Bell, the pro, greets me by name when I come in, or the same thing at Prestwick, in some cases remembered me from 2 or 3 years before. I don't know. That just goes a long way with me. And I don't know. There's a personal connection and a genuine. I mean, I remember that day at Cruden Bay, Les, the general manager, sat down at the table and asked me just in detail what I thought about. They had made some changes they changed the 9th hole and moved the tee closer to the edge of the cliff. And I had not been there since they'd made that change. And it's brilliant. I mean, it's really just completely changes that hole and makes it an all-world hole. And so I told him, I said, "Well, it's one of the greatest changes I've ever seen. Just totally changes that hole." And he wanted to know what I thought. And I don't know. I enjoyed that discourse and that kind of, and you would never get that at a comparable. I mean, the private clubs in the U.S., and look, I've been invited to a lot of them, and I'll be invited again, and I'm I'm grateful when I am, but it's just a different mindset, you know.
Les is so accommodating as well that if you'd have said you preferred the old tee box, he probably would have moved it back.
It probably would have.
Yeah, they would have made a U-turn.
Yeah, they would have changed it. But
I think there's a great thread there that cuts through with Scottish golf and obviously the people. You mentioned Robbie. I should obviously add that both you and Robbie have been big supporters of, Pod and, enjoy sort of interacting and stuff. And whenever I think about Robbie, for some strange reason, I can only picture him as a girl dressed in tartan because it's his Twitter profile. No, I've not met him in person, but I'm very much hoping to get to Machrihanish at some point this year. I think we'd really like to go there. I'm hoping we can hook up with Robbie when we do that, but it's weird, isn't it? You mentioned Robbie, and I when I read about him and when you write about him and the stories, and yet all I can picture is the picture of the Scottish girl playing the bagpipes that's off his Twitter. Bizarre.
Well, it's funny, and I hope you guys, you do need to, I've told him when he retires from his job with Historic Scotland, he needs to caddy at Machrihanish, and Dunaverty for that matter. But he's just a genius as far as, he's a very good player. He plays off 4, I think, and just hits the same low draw, just one after another. That same Scottish links, guy that's grown up playing links golf, but he knows the course. He tell you where to hit it. He's just great. He knows the history of everything. He's interested in it. So I would definitely recommend you do that. But I first found him on Twitter from his post about his work. He, these historic sites.
Castles, yeah.
And I'm an architect. So that's how I started following him. And then the more I sent him a few messages, and I realized he also is a big golfer, and we became friends through Twitter. And, that's how I met up with him several years ago. And, that's the great side about golf and golf Twitter is, there's a lot of negative, obviously there's a ton of negative stuff on there, but for the most part, the people that love golf are happy to talk about, interesting golf things and not necessarily some of the negative things that are going on in the world. So, but he is so good to play with, and he's a little bit, depending on, whether he's had a tenants or not, he's a little bit reticent, but he will give you some good advice on how to work the right line, and I've played Machrihanish and Dunaverty so many times I don't even know, but he still tells me stuff like, well, you really need to hit it. Really need to go on this line right here because the wind's going to push it back a little bit. It's just that, that's the other thing, I love the interaction of discussing a shot. I probably would have, if I started over again, I'd probably be a caddy. And, I love the interaction between giving people.
Same.
It's fun. It's
fun.
It's almost as much fun, honestly.
Even if you don't pull it off,
even if you don't pull it off, the sort of the discussion of, and then when you do pull it off, and I've got a couple of instances in the book where I pulled off a shot and I had a caddy with me, and which I think I only did a couple of times on that trip, but that's one of the great things in golf is that kind of discussion and planning and executing it. And if you do that a couple of times in a round, you're set. Who cares if you made a 8 on the hardest hole out there? So yeah.
Well, Robbie's quite a good segue into talking about the book, I think, because, Robbie's a very close friend of yours. And, I think the premise of this trip was going out and spending a lot of time with Robbie at Dunaverty and using that as a bit of a base. Can we talk a little bit about the book? And because there's some quite serious stuff in there as well. And it's, I think there's some manic highs with the courses and the places you visit and the stories, but there's also, there's a very deep emotional thread that runs through it. And I think, I'd love to talk about that with you. Okay.
Well, yeah, it's it's a tragedy, and there's no way around it. My youngest son, Jordan, died suddenly. He was when he was 21, and he was a big golfer, great golfer. We from the time he was 9 or so, that's all we really did. I took him around to tournaments, and I didn't really play much golf myself, and it was all about, and I was happy to do it. I loved it. Taking him all over the South to play in these tournaments, and he was a very successful. His team won the state championship when he was in high school, and he just really his future was great in the golf. I mean, and then he just when he started playing college golf, he started to, a little bit before that, but he started to have some emotional problems. Not to the point where you just were tremendously worried, but just he was different. And so at any rate, he died accidentally from an interaction of a drug that he was taking, and it just destroyed me completely, my whole family. I mean, Jordan has 2 older brothers, Jonathan and Jake, and we've all just been close, and he still lived with us, and he was it's just horrific. So I was trying to finish my first book, the Sweetens book, when it happened, and that, for whatever reason, that for a few weeks, that gave me something to kind of just take my mind off what was going on, and so I had that, and when I finished that, I was like, well, what am I going to do now? And I just couldn't sleep. I couldn't really think. I couldn't hardly do anything. And I just thought, Scotland is where I've always been the happiest. I just cannot. I've got to do something to get away and try to figure out if I need to just keep going. Because that's how bad something like this is. I mean, it just, when a child dies, it's just the most horrific and unnatural thing that you can go through as a human. So I called Robbie, and I told him, look, Robbie, I need to get away. I said, I'm thinking about coming over for a long time. I said, do you mind if I stay with you? And I couldn't even really get it out. He said, look, you come stay with me as long as you want. I'll take off work. We'll play golf when we can. If I have to work, you can go. There'll be a ton of stuff you can do. You can sit in my back garden and write if you want to, whatever you want to do. So he invited me, which was very kind, or otherwise I couldn't have stayed that long. And so, it just, it was a way to try. I didn't know what to do, and that was the only thing I could think of. So I COVID was raging then, and there were still restrictions, and I decided I was going to come anyway, and I was going to have to stay at Robbie's house for like 8 or 9 days at the start of the trip to quarantine. And like 2 days before my plane left, the UK government changed that, and all I had to do was have a negative test when I got there. So I got a negative test right off the bat, and I was free. I had 9 days of nothing planned, and so I just went everywhere. We planned to go to Colonsay, and I kind of played a lot of it by ear, which was great. And I know that everybody can't do it that way, and it just so happened that's the way this trip worked out. I just kind of did what I felt like doing. I mean, I had a few things planned, but not a ton. And people that we met invited us to. We went over and played North Berwick and Gullane, and it's in the book. I met Katrina Matthews' husband, caddied for me at North Berwick, and was great.
Oh, yeah, wow.
Yeah, just brilliant guy, and we had a wonderful time, and played Gullane with a couple of guys that just were great. And just that was kind of the ongoing theme. I mean, people would invite me if they'd seen that I was there, and I would take them up. I'd take them up on it if I could, or Robbie and I would go somewhere. And I kind of, as I mentioned, one thing I like to do is just keep a journal of everything that happens. And so I knew I was going to write, but when I started the trip, I guess I didn't know for sure that I was going to write this book. I know I didn't, but I started writing down everything every night that happened, the people I talked to, the discussions I had, notes about the golf course. If there was a few holes that I really stood out to me, I would write that down. So, I had this journal of this 32 days in Scotland, and it when I got home and I looked through it, I thought, I think there's a book here. And I talked to my publisher that did the Sweetens Cove book, and he's like, yeah, he said, this is great. And so I started writing it, and, I wrote about 4 chapters in Golfer's Journal. And I know this is a long answer, but, Golfer's Journal contacted me asked me if I wanted to write something about what happened with Jordan. And I said, well, I don't know. I said, I've started writing this book, and I said, I've already written some of it. And they said, well, think about it and let us know. And I thought about it a couple of days, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to do it. It might be a good way for me to sort of, I don't know, preview the book or think about how I want to do the book. And I sat down in a weekend and I wrote that story straight out. And, they were great. They did very little editing to it. And Tom Shaw did the photography, which is beautiful. It's all Dunaverty.
The essay is beautiful, the way it jumps between the stuff with Jordan and then talks about the courses and the trips and stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's just a beautiful piece. And like you say, with Tom Shaw's photography as well in that piece, it's very sort of, it's evocative stuff.
Well, that's the way it's different from the book, in that the book is, 15 times longer, but, that idea of kind of jumping back and forth, I don't know where that came from. I started writing, and that just came to me, and it just fell that way. And I think it was, I ran into Travis Hill and Tom Coyne at the PGA show that write for Golfer's Journal. Travis is the editor. I ran into them a couple of weeks ago, and they said, this has been the most, in the history of Golfer's Journal, this has been the most viewed story that we've ever had.
Wow.
And, that meant a lot to me. And I'm glad I did it now, because I did hear from hundreds of people, and, it did kind of give me an idea of how the book might progress. And so that was, but, the book takes all that stuff to a different level. But I did want to, one of the things that I did, Sam, that I really was important to me is I wanted this book to be a love letter to Scotland and Scottish golf and what it's meant to me all these years. And, so I've been happy to hear from so many different people that say, this book has inspired me to take a trip. I want to take the same trip you did, or I want to go to Durness, or I want to go to Reay, or, how do I get to these places? And so, a lot of people have told me that they've cried and they've laughed and they've smiled through the whole book, which that's the highest compliment I can get, honestly. Yeah. I mean, I've told several people, we've all loved reading, especially people that listen to a podcast like this. And, what's the point of reading or watching a movie or watching a video if you don't feel something from it? And so the fact that people are experiencing all those different types of emotions means, at least to me, that it's been successful in that regard.
I think, first of all, Jim, I mean, my deepest sympathies when we spoke on the phone last week, and you sent through a PDF of the book, and I unlike you, I am not an avid reader. I read because I need to, and I read what I need to read. I read your book on the eve of my son's 4th birthday, and I must say I was tremendously moved, and it was something I couldn't actually put down. And I found it, as a parent, very, very, very difficult to read, I must say. And when you get through it and you talk about your trip to Scotland, I know you say in the book it was something that you and Jordan had talked about doing together before he passed. Not that anything like this can be cathartic, because nothing can help the situation. But did you find the trip, manage to help you move forward?
It did. I mean, it was. I don't know. And it's kind of an ongoing theme in the book, but there was people like Robbie and Alistair McDougall at Golspie and Greg McRae, who's a member at Shiskine and Brodick, and these people that I met and, had dinner with or had drinks with and played golf with, they knew what had happened, but they didn't make a big deal out of it. And they I don't know, the way that, I don't know, just the subtle courtesies and things that people did for me meant a lot. And it was also easier to be around people that, that didn't know everything. And I could, if I wanted to talk about it, I could. Robbie and I were together, I don't know how much, but, just at least 2 weeks of that trip, probably a little bit more. And, we didn't really, those first 9 or 10, 12 nights at his house, we never really brought it up. I mean, we'd go out and get fish and chips and, drink attendance and watch golf. And, the golf coverage on Sky is way better than it is in the U.S.
Thank you very much, Jim. Jim.
It's brilliant. It's so much.
You mean you
better.
Get to see golf shots, don't you? On
you see golf shots as opposed to Cadillac commercials and stuff. But we watch golf, and he didn't really bring it up, and people would. I remember I was at Golspie, and Alistair just said I was trying to pay, and he was like, "No, don't worry about that. Just go have fun. I want you to enjoy yourself." And that happened more often than not. And something about the way that people treated me and helped me, and that's not to say that toward the end. I mean, I broke down a few times in the book. Sometimes I was by myself. Sort of the climax of it when I'm with Robbie at Dunaverty. I just really.
That's the bench on 11, isn't it?
The bench on 11, the 11th hole, which is on my eclectic list too. It's kind of the highest point at Dunaverty, and I don't know. I mean, it just all came crashing down, and I just really lost it for a couple of minutes. And Robbie had his hand on my shoulder, and he really just didn't have to say anything. He was just being there, and I can't tell you when you've gone through something like this. There's just no way to deal with it. Sometimes just being around people and just being normal is a gift. And, I don't know that for whatever reason, being at all these places again that I've gone to, and, going to some new places and meeting people, and having these discussions, without feeling like that I had to talk a lot about it. It just really helped me. And, I did feel better toward the end. I saw another old friend called Chris McBride right at the end, and he's a caddy at Prestwick, and Chris was great. I mean, he's not on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. I mean, he doesn't even drive a car. I mean, he's an old school Scottish caddy. I mean, I think I've got a line in the book.
Did you write about him in the Links Diary?
I did write about him in the Links Diary.
Every photo, he seems to be smoking from memory.
He probably is.
Yes.
I'm not surprised, but
it's a good piece.
I write about him again in the book, and it's a little bit of the same, but some different stuff too. And he caddied for me the first time I went to Prestwick in 1994, and we've stayed in touch all these years. And but he didn't even, he didn't know anything about what had happened, and I wasn't playing good starting out, and he asked me what was wrong, and I said, well, I've just had something terrible happen, Chris, and I said, I'm been over here trying to get through it, and he didn't really ask me. And then that night, we went that night or afterwards to have a drink, and we kind of told him about it, and yeah, he's been great. I mean, he texts me all the time, and he just but that kind of empathy, you know, I say this in the book, but you know, and I've said this a couple of times, but you know, Scottish people have been throughout their history have been kind of oppressed and had some terrible violent things happen, and you know, not in the recent history, but I think they're the way that they are is naturally sympathetic to people in a way that at least in my experience, and it did help me. And I can't thank Robbie enough, and Greg and Alistair, and you know, Donnie McLean at Dunaverty, who's been great to me. And you know, I'll say this real quick about Donnie McLean. I mean, I've stayed at his house. In the book, that's where Robbie and I stay at the end. He's got two houses. He's got a house and a little cabin right next to at Dunaverty Rock, which is, you know, 75 yards from the fourth hole. And so we stayed there 4 or 5 nights and met Donnie, and he was always around, and we got to know him. And so I want to tell this story real quick because it's a good one. So I went back last year, and that's kind of in the epilogue to the book, a little bit of that. But I was playing Dunaverty at the start of that trip. I was staying with Robbie again, and I was walking on the fourth hole, and I looked over to where the houses are, and I saw Donnie over there putting out the laundry or something on the line. And I don't know, he looked over, and I yelled at him, and I walked over there, and he hugged me, said, Jim, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm back. Donnie, I'm back playing again. I said, I tried to book your house, but it was all booked up. I said, I guess it's getting too much publicity now. And he kind of laughed, and so before I even got through with the round, he sent me a message. He had my cell phone number. He said, Jim, somebody's canceled on me. He said, if you want to come back and stay for 3 or 4 days, you can have the cabin. He said, I won't charge you anything. And this cabin, you guys, I mean, I'll send you a picture of it. I mean, it's right on the edge of Dunaverty Bay. It's really ridiculous. It's not even ridiculous. It's not even realistic, honestly. I mean, it's, you got these 2 bay windows looking straight out into the water, and you're literally 10 steps from the bay. And
wow.
So I was staying with Robbie that night, and so I told Donnie, I said, yeah, I'll be back. And so when I got back to Robbie's, I said, Robbie, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave.
I'm moving out.
I'm moving out. And he laughed. He said, hey, I do the same thing. Don't worry about it. So that, you know, it's kind of a long story, but that, you know, he didn't have to do that, and he didn't charge me anything. And I stayed in that place and played Dunaverty, you know, could walk out. I walked out at night, and, you know, walk out at 8:30 at night and hit chip shots to the 4th green. And it's one of my favorite. It is my favorite place to stay. And I've got it booked in April, so I'm excited to get back.
But, Jim, we've asked you to put together an eclectic 18 that goes with your book from the things. Now, it's interesting. We can't go through it. We will put it out in accompaniment to this podcast. We can't go through it, or we just don't have the time. But a lot of people that go to Scotland will play the Prestwicks, the Muirfields, the Dornocks. Now, although you've got Prestwick on here, that is not what your eclectic looks like. Pick out a couple of courses for us, just as a little gift. There's some here that even I haven't even thought about.
Even you,
like
Tom.
Gairloch.
Even you, Tom, as golf most travelled.
No, but like this, we've done quite a lot of Scotland. I don't know anything about Gairloch. Nothing. Yeah.
I mean, Wick is at the end of the world. I mean, Jim, take it away. Take it away. This is your eclectic 18.
Well, I'll pick out
just
a couple.
You
know, and I had a lot of fun doing this. I think this is one of my favorite things you guys have done. I love it when you put this out from different people. I saw Sam Cooper's, which I really, really loved. And
that's a bit of you, that one, was it?
Sam is, mine is probably in the same vein as his, I would say, or somewhat. And, but I love it. I love this. I love the premise of it. And I think I mentioned to you on the phone, it's hard to do. It's much, much harder than you would expect. And now in this case, I had 28 courses to work from. A couple. Corrie is one that I have to point out. Corrie is on Erin across the island from Shiskine on the opposite side of the island. It's just a 9-hole course in this glen of the just below the mountains. These peaks of these mountains. When you sort of play the first hole, which is a par 3, and you come to the second hole, and honestly, you guys, I hate to go back to this, but if you're there on a sunny day, it doesn't even look realistic. It looks like a computer-generated image of some Hollywood movie. I mean, these mountains are just there, and you've got this hole. And so the second hole at Corrie is this par 3 that's 199 yards, and the only thing you can see from the tee is this massive oak tree. And so you walk up there, and I remember the first time I played it, I walked up to the tee, and I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do here? And I knew it was a par 3, and I kept looking. And so the green was right behind the tree. And there's a big mound to the right, kind of a hill. And the only way you could get to this green was to play your shot off of the mound and let it run down to this green. And it's ridiculous, but it's just pure fun. And it's the only you would only see this in the UK and in Scotland and these places. So Corrie, if people go to Erin to play Shiskine, go to Corrie, you'll love it. It's got 9 great holes, and you'll want to play again. And I think it's £15 for. I think it's 15 for the day. It's not much.
It's nothing.
Yeah. So that's one. And then let me think.
Tell me a little bit about Reay. Reay is one that, again, I've not heard a huge amount about.
Well, Reay is another one of my favorites that the first time I played it was on this trip, and it's a James Braid course up. Not far. It's way up there. It's not far from Wick. It's a little bit north of Wick. Not far from
nowhere north of Wick, Jim.
Yeah.
No,
well, it's
now
not,
I know you're lying.
it's not far from John O'Groats. So there you go. I was staying at a place. I played Durness, and the road to Durness is just biblical. That's the only word I can use. But the road from Durness to Strathty, which is just outside of Reay, it's just a little community. It's just, I drove, it's like I thought it was going to take an hour, and it took 3 hours, and it was just a single track. And I think I've got it in the books, but these camper vans are barreling towards you 4 in a row, and you're just holding on for dear life. And so I got to this little hotel, and the gentleman he had a little restaurant attached, bar and restaurant attached to it. Great little place. And he said, "What are you going to do?" I was staying there 3 nights. "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "I was going to go back to Durness." I said, "But I'm not driving back over there." And he laughed. He said, "No, I understand." And he said, "Well, and I knew that there was some golf around. I knew Reay and Wick were around there. And he said, "We ought to go over to Reay. It's about 15 minutes from here." And anyway, it's a James Braid course, and it is just beautiful. It's just like Brora and some of the other braid courses. It just sits in the landscape, just this kind of elegant, like Ely does, or in Boat of Garten, any of these braid courses where you just get the feeling that he walked out there and he hardly moved any dirt. And it's just, there was nobody out there, and that was actually nobody in the clubhouse that day. That I just put the money in a box and played. There was one guy on the course. He played through me, and talked to him for a minute, but just hole after hole, just this beautiful rolling links land. I urge people to. I urge people to play it if you're up there. It's just great, and it's a perfect. It's very reminiscent of Brora to me, and which is another one that I love and is on this list too. So if you're interested in braid and you're interested in just very elegant links course where the ball rolls out 100 yards, nice people. Those courses, Wick and Reay, and you get the conditions, you get the true links conditions. I mean, you literally what the weather gives you is what you get. I mean, I was lucky. I had been there; it had not rained in weeks, and the ball just rolled out. It's so much fun. The ball just rolled out forever, and I think the hole at Reay I had was the ninth, and I've just quickly it's a par 3 called Chapel, and it's in this kind of hidden corner of the course right by the water. And you don't even realize that it's very unusual because you're kind of sheltered from the rest of the course when you get back in this corner. And it's just a stunning hole. And I just sat there. I was there's nobody out there. I sat there and just took it all in for 30 minutes. And it's just one that stood out to me on the course of really a lot of good holes. So, but yeah, I urge people to go up. If you go up to Dornoch and Brora, keep going. Go to Reay and Wick. Go to Durness. Durness is great. I mean, you have to be committed to get there. But and Gairloch is up that way too. So, those kind of remote highland courses are,
that's the real win with them, though, isn't it? The fact they're hard to get to, that's why they're so special, because if they were on your doorstep, then they would probably be so busy they'd lose some of the magic. And, being able to sit on a tee box for half an hour and just take it in,
well,
it's just not a luxury we get very often.
I think I say this in the book. If Reay was three hours to the south, you wouldn't be able to get out there. I mean, it's just where it is. It's and they've got a great membership, and they have, it's a very, great community club, and they're friendly as they can be. But it's just, you're not gonna, if even at Wick, which I love, the lady behind the bar who was the general manager, I talked to her for a while, and she's like, well, we don't get many Americans up here. And she said, but the ones that come always seem to love it. And I said, yeah. I said, you just can't get people to understand, because it's still, even for American standards, it's a trip to get up there, and especially if you're on a trip where you've only got 10 days. And I've been lucky that I've had enough time that I can go to these places, and so
yeah, it's so difficult because when the American visitors come over, invariably there aren't a huge bunch of Americans that are coming over as often as you're coming over, and they've seen the open courses, and it's really hard to convince anybody, really, even Welsh and English people going north of the border to try the unknown. But there's so much gold to be had there. What's in the plans? Have you got a future trip to Scotland, and what's
April?
What's on the agenda?
I'm coming over in April, and we're having a book signing, kind of book launch, Scottish book launch at Dunaverty on April 23rd. From 1 to 4, it's in the clubhouse, and there'll be books available. I'll be signing copies, and I'll probably do a reading from the book, and
awesome.
I know a lot of the members are interested in getting it, and I've had some other people, but that seemed like the place to do it, and so much of the book is set there is set in Southend and Dunaverty. So we're going to have that. There's a open the day before that I'm going to play in, and with Robbie. So I got to get my game in shape, Robbie, so he won't have to carry me around. But we're gonna stay out at Donnie's place at Sea Captain's house and play Machrihanish, and then I'm going to go up. I'm going to go back to Machrihanish, which I just fell in love with last year. But I'm going to try to hit a course called Berwick, which is close to Machrihanish, that I have not played.
I think
And
Sam Cooper's been there from memory. I think he really enjoyed it.
Sam has been there, and he's one of the few I know that have been there. And I couldn't get there. It's such a little bit of a production to get to Askernish, and we just didn't have enough time. But said I'm going to do that and then come back down and go out to Erin and play Corrie and Shiskine and jump over to Prestwick and see Chris and McBride and play there. And I do have on the list a couple of places that I've never been that I'm going to try to hit right at the end. Port Patrick and St. Madan I have never been to, and those are two that I've kind of had on my list, and so I'm going to do that toward the end and then head out. But yeah, that's coming up in April, and if anybody, I know it's a little bit of a trip to get down to Dunaverty, but anybody that lives on the West Coast or Glasgow and you want to come down, love to see you and talk to you and sign a copy of the book for you. We'll have plenty for sale there, and we'll have some refreshments and stuff just to be a nice afternoon.
And presumably,
so anyway.
Jim, if people want to keep up to speed on all this, they can follow along on Twitter would be the best way, and you'll kind of keep everyone up to speed on dates and book signing. I don't know if you're going to have enough copies, I'll be honest. I think this book's going to fly off the shelves. You're probably not going to have any left over to sign in Dunaverty. Be full print run done.
Well, one of my small regrets so far about this has been, the book's published in the U.S. by a publisher in Chicago, and we tried really hard to have a UK publisher team up with us so we could have the book available directly in the UK, but we couldn't find one. We had two or three that were interested, but it just never quite worked out. So, I do sort of regret that the shipping is a little bit expensive, but a lot of people in Scotland and England and Ireland and Wales have bought the book already, and they've been kind enough to pay the shipping that it cost. And we are going to have a discount code if people that listen to this want to order it that will kind of offset the shipping, and you guys can put that in the notes or however you want to do it. But
we'll put it in the notes, but we can say it now as well. It's 20 off at backninepress.com, which gets you 20% off the sale price there if you guys want to order it. But that will certainly go in the notes as well, Jim. But
and I will add, Jim, it's not even that there's a little bit extra for shipping, but it's not crazy. It's like $17, so it's
I know, but
it's well worth having. Like, I'm a massive, like, we talked about this on a pod we did this week, but I really like having books. Like, I think there's just something very nice to having books on shelf, particularly golf. It's for a class example, knowing that we were going to talk on this podcast, last few days, just pulled out Golfer's Journal 20. It was like, read that article, or, they're great to have references there so that you can kind of draw on them. And yeah, I think, this is an absolute no-brainer for anyone who likes golf travel, likes your story and stuff. It's a must buy, really.
Yeah.
Well, I want people of all the places. Of course, people in the U.S. have been great to purchase it too, but I really want people, because I think it's interesting, for people to see how maybe an outsider, per se, even though we joke that I'm an honorary Scot now, but how I see things and how I've looked at things over the years. And I just think there's so much there. There's so much great food. I mean, for whatever reason, the kind of the trope had been, don't go to the UK. The food in England and Scotland, it's terrible. It's great. I don't know where that came from. Maybe that was the case in 1950 or something. But I'm telling you, you can find so many great places.
Particularly on the coast, fresh produce. I think you talk about fresh oysters, don't you, coming off the golf course or something like that. Was that Dunaverty as well?
That was at Colonsay. We got into the hotel that night, and we were sitting out in the garden waiting on our table, and the manager came out and sat down and talked to us, and he said, I said, what do you think? What do you got tonight? And he said, well, we just got the oysters in from the other side of the island just this morning. He said, you're going to want to get that. And it's just, there is no substitute for seafood that has come straight out of the ocean. I mean, and you find that so much in Scotland. You're right. These little places, these little shacks, or even these little hotels that are just right there by the water, and it's just, there's nothing like it. I mean, I'll shut up because I could go on forever, but in Oban, there's a little place called the Green Seafood Shack that Robbie introduced me to, and I've been to several times now. And it's literally just a little shack by the water, by the ferry terminal. And there's always a line. You stand up and eat, but you order mussels and oysters and, just fresh seafood. And there's just not much done to it. And it's perfect. And, I don't know. That's the other thing I hope comes across is some of the places, some of the other stuff you can do besides golf, which when I was younger.
Yeah, it's bigger than just the golf. It's the travel, it's the culture, it's the food, it's the people, everything.
Give yourself time to enjoy some of that. Don't run yourself. I mean, golf is important and it's great, and you want to see as much as you can, but you don't want to just get to the room and pass out at night from exhaustion and then get up and do it the next day. I mean, look, give yourself some time to see how other people live and, enjoy some of the culture, So that's a point that I've always tried to make. So I hope that comes across too.
Well, Jim, I think those are outstanding words of wisdom, and for someone who's so much more traveled than we are. Thank you so much for giving us the time and coming on to talk about your book. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we wish you all the best with the book sales. If you want to get it again, you can go to back9press.com. It's 20 off. It's a fantastic read. I would recommend it to absolutely anyone. And Jim, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, guys. Hope to talk again.
Watch this.